faces and some names. And I just want to welcome everybody before we get going. Today, we're really glad that you're all here. We're going to be doing Opioids 101, and we have a guest expert from the National Harm Reduction Coalition do the training presentation for us. But I just want to announce that this is a collaboration that we at the California Prevention Training Center have been working with the Office of AIDS and the California STD Control Branch to bring, to enhance and increase capacity among DIS staff and others who do frontline work in HIV and STDs. And so we're really happy to respond to some of the requests and the needs that people have indicated in wanting more information on working with different clients who are using substances and how we can best do that. And so really capacity and increase the understanding, we felt it best to bring in an expert. And so we're working with the National Harm Reduction Coalition. And I want to welcome Tanagra, who's going to be here with us. She's going to do an introduction of herself and her capacity. And we're really just excited to have you with us. And I'm so excited again to just be part of this and for all of us to be together today. So again, nice to see everybody. And I'm looking forward. Welcome, Tanagra.
Hi, everyone. It's so great to be here. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to join you and be in community with you today. I work for the National Harm Reduction Coalition. I have worked for HRC for about 4.5 years. I am based out of Oakland, California right now in the moment, although originally I'm from San Juan, Puerto Rico, and I will be relocating there very soon. And so I'm looking forward to that and excited for this conversation about Opioids 101. And I got to harm reduction in the early mid-90s through HIV prevention work that I was doing in Western Massachusetts, which is where I was living before. And once I found harm reduction, it totally makes sense to me. I was like, how come I have not been doing this sooner? It's totally logical to me. It totally made sense. And it really allowed me to learn more about myself and the way that I wanted to be in community with people, how I wanted to approach the way that I connected to other humans, how I saw myself, how I saw the people that I was working with. And really shifted and changed and continues to do so every day, the way that I engage in my practice. I'm really grateful to be here and talk to you about this. And HRC has been around for almost 30 years, and we continue to do work around creating spaces for dialogue and action that can help heal the harms caused by racialized drug policies. And we do that through policy and advocacy, training and capacity building, overdose prevention, and our regional conferences, as well as our state or national conference, which will be happening next year in October in San Juan, Puerto Rico. So we are in the midst of launching our official announcement. I encourage you to pay attention to that. If you're interested in submitting an abstract to present, those will be opening also around the end of the year to next year. So check back to our websites to see what the instructions are around that, and we'll have scholarships available for folks that apply. So that's really exciting. I want us to go through some housekeeping if possible. I want to ask folks to please, if you can, add your pronouns and your name, rename yourself and add your pronouns next to your name, particularly if you're joining us from different devices. It'd be really, really helpful to because we're going to go into breakout groups, to know that if you're in a computer and using your phone for audio calling in, that we can put you in the same room. I don't want to send you to different rooms and then have you be in a room, your computer, and then you are on the phone in another room. So if you can do that, that'd be really helpful to us. I want to also ask you to please keep your microphone on mute unless you're speaking, and we're definitely encouraging and want to talk with folks and want to have conversation, but to minimize ambient noises, we're asking folks to keep their microphone muted and then you can unmute when you want to speak. If you can also make sure that you can use the chat box. I know some folks prefer using the chat to communicate, and we welcome that. We also welcome you to peruse the chat box to see what folks are commenting, or if folks have questions, what are the responses. Hopefully we won't have any technological issues, but as you know, after almost 2 years on this virtual platform, we know that that sometimes happens. And so if it does, we will roll with them. Hey, Greg. Yes.
Yes, I just want to let everyone know I'm producing today, so I'll be breaking you into groups. And I really is helpful to be able to know if you're on the phone and a computer. So if you're on the computer and can chat directly to me and let me know so I can connect your phone with your video. So that's really important. And if I'm having trouble finding somebody, I may send you a message and say, who is this? So be on the lookout in the chat.
Thank you, Greg. Absolutely. And if folks don't have accessibility needs and they're able to come on camera, I will encourage folks to come on camera. It is helpful to see people's faces. So if that's something that you're able to do, please, I encourage you to do so. And I will be using closed captions throughout the session as well. And I think you can see them in my screen. And so if you can come on camera, that'd be great. And when we go into breakout groups, I really encourage you to do that as well, so folks can see you in the small groups and hear you. In terms of our workshop today, we are going to go into like a general definition of opioids, and then we'll look at specific classes of opioids, such as fentanyl and heroin, prescription opioids, and then we'll move into some risk reduction strategies, particularly safer use methods and some harm reduction strategies, and then we will be closing. So that is what our training looks like today. If you have questions or comments, please feel free to ask them, raise your hand, come on mic if you want to ask using your voice, or you can use the chat box, and I try to make sure that I'm looking through the chat box. So if questions come up, I'm able to respond to them or comments, but if I have not gotten to yours, you can always use the hand to let me know that you had a question. I want to share also this glossary with you. I will be using some of these terms throughout the training. And so I wanted us to make sure that we are coming at this from the same sort of grounding. We use person first language, and which is something that has shifted and changed since I started in harm reduction way back when I started training and doing this work in the 90s. We used IDUs, intravenous drug users, right? Or drug users in general. And as we shifted and changed, we recognized that people are more than their behaviors and more than what they do. Human beings are human beings, and we are not defined by our behaviors. We want to really center the humanity of people when we're working with them. And so we want to make sure that we're using person first language. And so the same thing for harm reduction services. In the beginning, it was needle exchange. It has shifted and changed, and now we use syringe service or syringe access programs. I personally use harm reduction programs because to me, the work that we do extends beyond providing equipment to people to use substances. We do a lot of comprehensive, holistic work with folks in collaboration with partners such as you. And so I will use harm reduction programs, syringe access programs, syringe services program, but also knowing that my age, I may slip back into needle exchange every once in a while. If I share it, you know that I'm also speaking to these programs as well. And I also wanted to share some group agreements for us since we're going to be in community for the next almost 2 hours. I want to make sure that we are able to share in this space, that we're able to participate in a way that feels safe for us. And so I wanted to bring those to you and see if there's anything here that you are seeing for the first time. Please let me know, and we can clarify it. So if there's anything new to you that you would like clarified, you can raise your hand and let me know, or you can type it in the chat box, please. Say it rough. Acacia, right? Perfect. So when we say it rough, is a way for us to encourage us to ask questions or to share something where we find that we don't have necessarily, we don't feel we have the right words or the right terminology. Sometimes that happens and we hold back. And we, oh, if I say this or I ask this question, people are going to think I am, think some sort of way about me, or I feel like I don't have the words and then I'm going to sound not smart, or, it's going to be messy. And so what we're encouraging folks is to preface it by saying, I'm going to say it rough, but we have to be mindful that if we say it rough, even if our intent was not to harm someone or hurt someone, sometimes it does have that impact. And that we trust ourselves as a community in this space today to be able to hold that complexity and to hold space for us to say it rough and also work together to reframe it in a way in which we have language that feels comfortable to all of us, and that we are also aware of the impact that that may have, right? And that we can support each other in this space to do that, because that's the way that we can learn, right? When we're able to ask those questions that feel hard or that feel difficult. And I see, wait, Elmo. Yes, wait, I love these. So wait is why am I talking? Right? And Elmo is everybody, let's move on. And so I appreciate Adriana for asking those. So wait is why am I still talking? And sometimes I have raised my hand or I've said things and then I'm sort of taking up a lot of space. So we want to make sure other folks have room to ask questions too. And Elmo is everybody, let's move on. Sometimes we get to a place where we are talking about something and we have discussed it enough and we feel like we are in a place where we can respect each other's points of view, but we're not coming to an agreement or a consensus that we agree that we are going to move on to the next topic. So absolutely, thank you for asking, Adriana. And then take names, not IDs. Yes. Make sure that we are sharing information here, that this is a safe space to share, that we, whatever we're discussing here, if we're sharing an experience or something that involves someone else that is not here, that we agree to not disclose information that could identify that person or that could potentially, because they're not here, right? They couldn't necessarily agree to have that information disclosed outside of the space. Is there anything here in this group agreements that is missing that you would need to have in this space to feel safe and able to participate? So I'm going to give it one more minute, seconds. Well, if that's a no, what I'm going to ask folks, if you agree to this, if you feel comfortable with disagreements, if folks can use their thumbs up emoji. Oh, it is okay to disagree respectfully. Yes. And respectfully means, it will mean that we have to define that right in the context of this space. And I think it's not, to me, it's not stigmatizing or shaming someone, right? And really being able to hold space for us, for each other, and to challenge each other in a way that we can grow from that with kindness and with empathy. So thank you for that, Paulette. I appreciate that. So thank you, everyone. So now I want to ask you this question, and you can come on microphone to respond to it, or you can use the chat box to type. In your experience from the work that you do, from what you've seen working with your communities, why do people use drugs? Thank you, Patrick. To escape. Thank you, Lupe. As a coping mechanism. What else? Let's see. To forget. Thank you, Vicky. I'm gonna let some other folks add. To be accepted. There are underlying needs that are not being met, for pain relief, for fun, to experiment, curiosity, to navigate post-trauma because we enjoy it. Some folks develop chemical dependencies, and so they need to use drugs so that they don't feel sick or their bodies don't react negatively to not using, to deal with pain. So we can feel good, right? To feel certain emotions. I love that, Marcela, right? What else? Lydia, I see that you're unmuted. Would you like to share? No? Folks can use their microphone too if you'd like. Vernon is sharing to self-medicate and Linda is sharing to numb, right? So to numb or to feel. right? To forget or to be present, to navigate with trauma, but also to enjoy ourselves and feel in our bodies and find connections to others, right? To forget, for some folks is to remember, for some of us is to work, and for some of us is to sleep, as Spike is sharing, right? So there's a multiplicity of reasons why we use substances, right? And it's certainly what we're seeing here is that it meets a need, right? Now I want to ask you, unless someone else wants to share, and I see that Heather, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. See that you're unmuted. Would you like to share? No? Okay. And so now I want to ask you, why is it that we just don't stop using drugs? Why don't people just stop using drugs? Because we develop a dependency, right? Because we can feel sick if we stop, right? Absolutely. If we don't have the connection to the systems that can help us navigate that, because we can physically do it. Physically, we can't. Thank you, Acacia. Because it becomes a part of life, right? It becomes a part of our life. It gives our life structure and meaning, right? Because we cannot deal with reality, because it's a habit, because we don't have social supports to present to help us stop using if we would like to, because we don't believe we have another outlet, Adriana is sharing, or other things that can take the space of our substance use, right, in a way that feels healthy to us. Because it feels good and we don't want to stop feeling good. Because we don't know how to stop. That is such a good point, A. Skinner, right? Absolutely. We may not know how to. We may want to, but we don't know how to. Because folks around us are also engaged in substance use. And so if we want to feel part of that community, that connection that we were mentioning before, stopping use may mean that for us, in our experience, it also means severing or stopping that connection to community, right? Deborah is sharing because it's really hard to break the habit once it has changed our thought process and our brain makeup. So there's chemical changes that happen that make it more difficult for us to feel that we're going back to the way that we felt before, right? So our normal is now different. And so we have to understand that. It's for some folks, it feels like around our impulse control, we may be struggling with impulse control, and it's due to several factors, right, that are complex as well. And for some of us, it's fear of the unknown, fear of how life would be without it. If I've been using substances for a while and they give my life structure and meaning and they serve a purpose, right? And you asking me to stop may feel really overwhelming and something that is not feasible for me to do, right? And so when we think of substance use, these are really good questions to ask, right? Because it helps us understand not only that people will have different reasons for using drugs, and as you see, there's a myriad of reasons why folks use drugs, but it helps us to also have the ability to brainstorm, options with people to help them reduce risk for fatal episodes or diseases, right? Thinking about the factors that surround people's substance use and the behaviors attached to that substance use is really helpful when we're thinking about how do we identify options with people? How do we have these conversations with people? Understanding what substance use does for folks and what needs it meets can help us understand then what may be feasible for them, or what may be attainable for them, or things that they may be open to exploring, right? And so harm reduction is the space in which we can have these conversations. Harm reduction is the space that allows us to unpack why people use drugs, why people don't stop using drugs. And it's based on that person's individual experience too, right? Which is really important. My reasons for using drugs and what they do in my life and for me are very different than what it would be for someone else in this call, and that is okay. Harm reduction gives you the space to do that and gives you the opportunity to utilize a broad spectrum of strategies, right, that can help reduce those negative consequences associated with substance use or sex work or other behaviors. And we do that through safer techniques, and safer techniques may be offering folks the opportunity, if they're using opioids, like in this case, to have access to naloxone, which is a medication that can reverse an opioid overdose and can help people come back to life. Right? We can have conversations about managed use, which is how do you use in a way that doesn't interfere with your day-to-day life if your choice is not to stop or you don't feel you want to or need to. And then there's abstinence, which is part of the harm reduction spectrum, right? abstinence from a substance that folks have identified as problematic for them, and it's changing the nature of my relationship to that substance. Harm reduction believes in abstinence or sobriety. And we believe in it because a lot of folks, many folks in harm reduction programs want to get there, right? And have been successful getting there. That I want something doesn't make it any easier, right? It's really hard to change behavior. And so abstinence has to be something that folks want, that folks feel connected to, and that folks feel that they have the support to get toward, to move towards, right? And so imposing abstinence on people may work for the short term, but in the long term, it doesn't work, right? And so we believe in abstinence if it's a choice, but harm reduction is not contingent on abstinence, right? Like harm reduction believes abstinence works for folks if it's a choice, but we don't expect people to get to abstinence or choose it. We believe that people need to do what feels best for them, what is safer for them. And so we work with folks that at different points in their lives, may decide not to ever explore abstinence, and that is okay, or have explored it and it didn't work for them, and that is okay. Harm reduction gives us the room to continue engaging people in those conversations and working with people and supporting people. Harm reduction is also a movement, right? It's a movement that explores or believes that public health and social justice are the same thing, right? That racism, stigma, and criminalization are the real true causes of harm. And I would add to that homophobia, transphobia, misogyny, right? Classism, right? Are the things that cause harm to people. That ending inequality and oppression means that we need to foster health and liberation. And that the only way that we achieve change that is truly transformative, that truly will shift and change the systems that we're in, is if we uplift and work towards creating those spaces where the leadership of those most impacted is followed. If we follow that leadership, if we center that leadership, if we center those voices, it finally is a way for us to shift and change systems that are harming, hurting, and impacting negatively people that we work with. And so I wanted to share with you this drugs wheel because I love it. I think it's beautiful, and it's also really fun for those of you that haven't seen it. They're really lovely humans, and Drug Watch, they want you to download it and use it, just give them credit for using it. And there's different drugs, right? There's opioids, stimulant, and pathogens, psychedelics, dissociatives, cannabinoids, and depressants. Today, we're going to be focusing on opioids. And we will be meeting, I think, next week, right? And we will be looking at stimulants. So today we're going to be looking at Opioids 101. And so I would like to ask folks if you can type in the chat box, what are some of the most commonly used opioids in your practice that you've seen people share that they use? And what are some of the common harm reduction messages that you would use when you're talking to folks about opioids? If they're talking to you and telling you, I'm using X opioid, what would be a common harm reduction message that you could share with someone that is using that particular opioid? So I see heroin is one of them. Heroin, yes. Natalie's sharing OxyContins or pills, Norcos. Hi, Sophia. Yes. Some folks may not know that their methamphetamine has opioids in it. We've seen some fentanyl present in the drug supply, particularly for folks that are using stimulants, particularly methamphetamine, and that can be really dangerous because and we'll talk about that next week, but if I use stimulants and I'm not expecting to have fentanyl in my drug supply, I may have an overdose because I may not have the resistance or the tolerance that I need to be able to navigate that. So although meth is not a methamphetamine, I see that, I don't know if you meant methadone or methamphetamine. Methadone is an opioid. Methamphetamine is a stimulant, but it may have opioids present. Fentanyl, and some of the messages, harm reduction messages that you can tell someone that is using opioids. What would be a harm reduction message that you could share with folks? Carry naloxone. Get access to new equipment, sterile equipment. Absolutely, if you're injecting particularly. Thank you. What else? Use less or with someone. Yes, not use alone, use less. Absolutely. Thank you, Natalie. How do you sterilize your equipment if you can get new ones? I love that, particularly, in some parts of the state, we know that harm reduction programs are not as prevalent or as available, and folks may need to share. So how is it that if I need to share, how can I do it in a way that protects me and those other folks that I may be having to share with? I love that. I appreciate that. Colleen, it's a really important point. Not to use alone if I can. Test our drugs, absolutely. If we have that ability to do drug testing, some places are establishing that. Some harm reduction programs are doing that and have used drug spectrometers. But you also can use fentanyl test strips that can be helpful in helping detect if fentanyl is present in the drug supply. Thank you. Have naloxone and don't use alone. And if you have to use alone, there is a line that you can call. It's called Never Use Alone. And they will be on the phone with you, and or they will text, make sure that they text if you need them to text you back, or they need to text someone. If you're in distress, they can text someone or notify someone or call someone that is nearby you that can come and help you. And so I can share that information with you if you would like. They're also building an app so that you can have it and share with your participants. Particularly, some folks may have to use alone because other people don't know about their use, and that has to do with shame and stigma, which is one of the biggest barriers that we have for folks to feel safe. And so when we think of a drug, right, a drug, in terms of its definition, it's any substance that in small amounts produces or changes, significantly changes our body or mind or both, right? And so as you were talking before, one of the reasons we may not stop using is because these changes have happened, right? The way that we feel, the way that our brain produces chemicals has shifted and changed. And so some drugs will mimic the natural neurotransmitters, and they will fool our receptors and they will lock into them, right? As if they were the ones that we were naturally producing. And what that means is that then our brain stops producing them because I'm feeding it to them, right? And so if I stop using, my brain won't be able to produce those in the same way that it did before. And that's why it's so important for us to have these conversations with participants, because they're going to feel different and probably won't feel well or good, right? And there may be some changes into their chemicals in the brain where we may feel more depressed or anxiety. These things happen. So it's important for us to support people if they're choosing to shift or change their use, as to how is it that I can connect you to have conversations with someone and have the resources that you need so that you can feel that this process is sustainable, right? And so if we think of cocaine and the brain, right? The drug use increases the dopamine release, and then the dopamine neurotransmitter is which contributes to those feelings of pleasure, right? So you can see how our brain, starts shifting and changing. Our mood starts shifting and changing, right? And if we don't get to produce that naturally, and I am not giving it to it, by using cocaine, then I'm going to have side effects. I'm going to feel differently. My life is going to be perceived differently. My body's going to feel different. And the way that I engage with the world, with myself, is also going to be changed, just as tolerance also gets impacted, right? And so it means that, the more that I use a substance, the more that I build, I'm building that tolerance, right? And so what it means is that also we're thinking about folks that are particularly with substances that we are asking them to stop using, or that they are forced to stop using because they're at the hospital or in jail or in a different space where they don't have access to their supply. Or some, like COVID, we saw this, a lot of folks, because they were several days without having access to opioids, particularly when they used again, a lot of them faced or experienced overdoses because their body, their body had lost the ability to be able to metabolize the substance the way that it did before when it was using regularly, right? So it can be a place where we are abstinent for a week or a couple of days can be really dangerous for folks in terms of lowering their tolerance to the substance and making them more vulnerable to a potential overdose. And we can see this, with opioids, but with other substances too. So in terms of the modes of use, when we think about how we use them, this is also going to impact the ability for folks to feel the effects in the body and why they choose certain methods or not. Also, we choose certain methods because of convenience, because of privacy, because of what we have available and accessible, right? So you can smoke, inject, snort, or eat your drugs. You can also booty bump your drugs. And there's benefits and drawbacks to each of those. As I was saying, some of us will choose certain methods of use versus others, given the context that we're in or the situation, right? And so I wanted to share this with you because this is also a good space to ask some questions with folks, right? In terms of why a particular method is working for them, or why hasn't it worked in the past? Why did they get to that particular method? It can help us assess also what are potential harm reduction tools that they may already be using, or tools that we want to share with them if they agree for us to share those, if they haven't thought of them or haven't considered them. And so in terms of the conversation are opioids, right? There's opioids that are regulated and opioids that are criminalized, right? And so as you can see, the ones that are regulated, what is the difference between the ones that are regulated and the ones that are criminalized that you can see? Why would we criminalize heroin and fentanyl and morphine, but not the others? What makes them different? Yeah, well, there's names, right? Toxicity, yeah, what else? Some of them can be more potent. Big pharma money, yes. 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 Used in healthcare settings, yes, they're prescribed by doctors, right? So there's something is prescribed to me, right? It means that I need it. My healthcare provider who has a license is providing it to me. A pharmaceutical company made it in a lab, right? And is selling it. And so, yes, fentanyl is used all throughout hospitals for pain. Yes, all of these, the fentanyl patches, there's the lollipops too. Absolutely. But also who's using the substances, right? And what we perceive in society, who are the people that are using the substances? And when we think of the war on drugs, right? And the way that it has started, sort of shifting and changing some of its language, right? We're seeing that the people who use heroin and fentanyl particularly are considered really dangerous, right? They're not good people. But if I was prescribed a tramadol, right? Or I am using methadone, right? Or buprenorphine because it's regulated, it feels safer, right? And so there is a criminalization of certain use, right? That we need to think about, particularly in the context of the interaction of folks with the criminal and justice system or all these other systems, right? And how they're treated through those. And so all of these, whether they're regulated or not, what they do is that they slow down our central nervous system, including our breathing and our digestive system, right? And these are all naturally derived from an opium poppy plant, or they could be synthesized, right? They can be made in a lab, right? And so someone shared that opioids makes them feel warm and safe and drowsy and confident, and that can take away my pain and my emotions, right? And that sounds really nice to me, right? If I want to feel safe and I don't want to feel pain and I want to not deal with my emotions and I want to escape or I want to take a break, opioids sound like they would help me with that and do a really good job, right? And so it's understandable and natural that people would want to use these substances, right? And would want to derive the benefits that they can experience from them. right? And some of the effects of opioid use can be having what it's called constricted pupils, or that they're pinned. Folks experience a sensation of being pain-free. Some folks may have their eyelids droop. Some folks may be what they call scratching and itching, or feel like a warm rush. Some other folks may experience nausea or constipation, and sadly, some folks may experience an overdose, right? And in terms of withdrawal symptoms, when we're thinking of opioid use, folks have reported back dealing with insomnia, experiencing hold and cut flashes, again, nausea and vomiting, a mild fever, cramping, diarrhea, sweating, muscle aches, feeling really depressed from not using. And someone said it's like the flu, but you want to die. So withdrawal is really a really terrible experience for people. People are in a lot of pain and a lot of discomfort. It's not pleasant at all. And we as human beings are wired not to want to feel pain, right, or unpleasantness. And so it makes sense that folks would want to avoid experiencing those symptoms, right? And so when we're thinking of withdrawal, we also have to think about the potential for opioid-related overdose, right? And so when we're thinking of the signs of an opioid overdose, things that come to mind that are the first things we should be paying attention to is we see someone that is unconscious and non-responsive, right? And that means that I call their name if I know their name. I may have moved their body, touched them, like in the arm or in the leg, and they are just not moving, not responding, right? I then look at their fingertips, right? Also the nail beds or around the mouth area, and it's either blue or ashy, gray or silver, right? And we have seen that the person's body may slump typically forward, right? So those are the signs of an opioid overdose. When we think of fentanyl overdose, we have to think that it can also include, besides the symptoms, what some folks name as wooden chest, which is that the person's chest becomes really, really tight, or it's almost like like connected to that standing seizure. You can see all of the person's bones, the ribs, everything here. And that standing seizure, the shin will drop down really tight, and their arms would bend down, and like they will be like this. So the person is standing like this, and it's if you've seen it, you will know it. And so that could be a sign of a fentanyl overdose, and we need to keep that in mind, because then our response to the opioid overdose will be similar. It will be the same. We may have to use more naloxone to support the person coming back from that overdose. And so when we think of the first class of opioids we want to discuss today, which are heroin and fentanyl, and I saw in the chat box that you all have mentioned that most of the opioids that your participants or folks that you know or you're working with were using or have mentioned that they were using were both of these, right? So in the Bay, what we find is black tar heroin, which is different than the supply in the East Coast, which is mostly powder. It is a Schedule I narcotic, which means that in terms of the DEA, that is the most heavily criminalized narcotic or drug. It is often mixed with fillers and other drugs to increase volume and potency. And this is something that we've seen particularly in the East Coast around, we used to begin to see how you use cut with a little bit of fentanyl or other things to make it more strong. Folks can snort, inject, or smoke the drug. And fentanyl, it is a synthetic opioid, like folks mentioned, and you can see the patches here. It is about 50 times stronger than heroin. It is very fast acting. It has been at this point the leading opioid for fatal overdoses, and we're finding we're finding in other drugs supply, usually by mistake, because they may be packing and cutting drugs in that setting, and sometimes there's cross-contamination. And we know that people do it intentionally and purchase it intentionally because it can be very cost effective for folks. If I know that I am using fentanyl and I'm taking the precautions to use it, and it is less expensive and more potent, and I can use less and it can last me longer, it may mean that economically it makes sense for that person to use fentanyl. And it is safe because I know how I'm using it, and I'm using it intentionally. And we have seen folks smoking fentanyl, which also is safer way for some folks to use, or for them, it lessens the potential for harm. And so it is important that when we're having conversations about substance use with folks, that we're mindful of how we engage in that conversation. So if they share with us that they're using fentanyl, we don't shame them as to why they're using it, which is something that we saw in the beginning, right? Of folks saying, but why are you using that? Are you crazy, right? And for folks, it's like, it makes sense, and they were using it safely, which is different than me using it without knowing what it is and not expecting it. And then that can really cause harms for folks. And if folks have questions or comments, you can share them in the chat box. You cannot overdose from touching fentanyl. This is something we want to, there's been a lot of let me see how I frame this. A lot of misconceptions that have been promoted in the media and throughout this epidemic, or what we're seeing around opioid use, to say that fentanyl is so dangerous that it's really threatening the police force and law enforcement, and it just has served to increase funding and more militarization of the police force, which is justified by a myth that is not true, but it continues to perpetuate a war on drugs and a war on people, particularly people that use drugs, particularly people that use opioids. And so they are not dangerous for in terms of being in contact with someone that used fentanyl, or that you touch something that had fentanyl. There is no symptoms that are consistent with toxicity from incidental contact with opioids at all. And dermal absorption is unlikely to cause opioid toxicity. We know that. There's actually a video produced by the DEA that shows a DEA agent handling fentanyl in a room to show that it's not, something that because you touch it, you can overdose from it. That is not true. And it's a myth that we need to stop, because what it does is perpetuates, more penalization, criminalization, and harms to people that use drugs. And if you're interested in more on this topic, when I share the slides with you, and I'll share them again, but you're welcome to check our blog on fentanyl exposure. I wonder if someone had a comment, because I see folks are unmuted. Yes, Natalie, there's a lot of misconceptions around this, and that blog, if you go to it, it'll be really helpful, because it gives also language for us when we hear these things, gives us language to be able to engage people in conversation and share why it's not true and the harms that it causes, right, for folks in our communities. And then there's prescription opioids, right? And under that, we have hydrocodone, and codeine, and OxyContin, morphine, Percocets, Vicodins, etc. They're widely available in pill form, some in liquid, and a few via medical drips. It is important to note that pills found from strict drug supply are usually not regulated and are mixed with other substances. So if folks are buying pills off the street, we certainly cannot tell what is in those pills, right? And why, and that's why having drug testing, it's so vital, right? Because I can buy a pill and I can go to my drop-in center, my harm reduction center, and I can have them test that pill and it can tell me what it has, right? And I know folks, Dance Safe, which is an organization that does harm reduction work and outreach and education in the dance circuit and the festival circuit, they're awesome. And they do drug checking there. And I think that is one of the most beautiful things, right? Because they're supporting people to be safe and healthy by letting them know, yes, this is that you bought, this MDMA is MDMA. So if that's what you wanted and you know how to do it safely, then you drink water, take breaks, do all these things. But if not, then I know, okay, wait a second, this has something else in it. I'm not used to this. Maybe this is not something I want to take, or if I take it, I need to be mindful, right, of some of the effects that may come from this, so that I have the decision power making decision to sort of choose, and protect and take care of myself and my community. Yes, we'll be sharing the link to the slides at the end of the training. I'll be putting it in the chat box. And if Shayna is asking, can the pills be used interchangeably to treat pain? Can you tell me more, Shayna, what you mean by that? Can I ask you to use your microphone if you feel comfortable and ask me and share more about what you meant by the question.
I'm asking if a person is interested in self-medicating, would
Yes.
they be able? Okay, would they be able to use any of any of those medications listed to treat their pain, or would one treat their pain more than the other if they were like addicted to heroin, per se?
Yeah, I would say that all of these are opioids, right? So they would address pain. It's just a matter of like, what is the strength of the pill, right?
Okay.
Like all of that dosage and stuff like that. And so I would say that if someone has been prescribed something, right? And the dosage is different, or they have never used it. I would say we have to be mindful of that.
Okay.
That folks could potentially use it. People do, we know that, right? It's just a matter of how much access they have to, because right now, one of the things that we've seen with the war on drugs around also the way that the state is responding to what's happening around opioids is that they have shut down most of the spaces that people were able to use to get pain medications to treat pain, like through doctors, etc. And so that's what's driven people actually to the market outside, to the unregulated market, to purchase heroin or fentanyl, right? And so tolerance may play a part on that, all of that. I would encourage folks, if you are purchasing pills on the street, if you have clients that are doing that or participants, if they can go and find a way to get tested to see what there is in there, and also to have naloxone with them all the time, because it may also be that the press pills are not opioids, right? It may be something else too. And so if you're interested, I think I can look for a list of our harm reduction programs in all of the East Bay. If you're not connected, I'm just want to make sure if you're connected with some of the harm reduction programs that you can connect participants to them. And if not, if you have this list, you can also work with them to help participants get more information and support around that. They also know, harm reduction programs know about bad pills or different strengths and potencies of drugs that are on the street, because participants tell them. So if there's a bad batch or there's something that is not good or really strong, people know that. And so they're able to then have that information, right? And be like, oh, wait a minute, they told me this could be really, really strong. So I have to use less, or use or taste first and see how it feels. Does that make sense?
Yes, that does. Thank you.
No, thank you for asking. Those are really good questions. And tolerance is also something someone is naming in the chat box that can play a part in choosing which drug to treat the pain. Absolutely. And so in terms of prescription opioids, if you're inhaling them, you will feel the effects between 1 and 3 minutes. If you're injecting them, between 10 to 30 seconds. If you booty bump them, probably you'll feel the effects in 30 minutes, around 30 minutes, and orally 30 to 60 minutes or more if it's a time release pill, which we've seen that folks are some of these, because they wanted to bypass, folks didn't want them to be used, or pharmaceuticals didn't want them to be used in different ways. They put time release on them. And so then that means that like folks need to help understand that, because sometimes you cannot bypass that. And it can last anywhere between 1 to 5 hours, the effects. And then in terms of heroin, some of the street names that we've heard is smack, manteca, junk, horse, bindles, bundles, bags, star, China white, dope, right? And you can see here, there's some images of heroin, some of the street names that folks have used. Folks that are choosing to use heroin, if you inhale it, again, it's 1 to 3 minutes. If you smoke it, 10 to 30 seconds. If you inject it, 10 to 20 seconds. And if you booty pump it, anywhere from 1 to 3 minutes. And it can last about 3 to 4 hours, the effect of heroin in the body. And then we have fentanyl. And we know that it's a synthetic opioid. As I mentioned, it's fairly more strong than heroin. It is very fast acting. And it's, as we know, it can be mixed and found in heroin and other drugs, such as pressed in pill form, or drugs that you don't expect to be there because they're not opioids, right? So this is the piece around doing a lot of the education around fentanyl. People can use fentanyl safely as any drug. You can use it safely or safer if you know what it is that you're using, right? If you don't know, then that makes it much more challenging to be able to make decisions that are informed to protect you. And so having these conversations around fentanyl and assuming that there will be fentanyl in most people's drug supply, it's also something that we're seeing, sort of like making that assumption and working from there. And so some cues that we can look for in terms of understanding what heroin and fentanyl do, but also why people would choose one versus the other, or what to look for. Heroin, it's when you find it in powder form, which is not something that we see very much here in the West Coast, is a light brown color, and we see that in New York or in New England. If you taste it by finger, it will have a metallic aftertaste that is really bitter. When you use it, it can produce that warm, fuzzy sensation in the body, and it will last longer than fentanyl, the high. The fentanyl is lighter in color and it stays sweet. So folks have tasted it, say like different than this, is not bitter or metallic, it's sweet. And folks have reported feeling an initial rush and then pins and needles, especially in the head and neck. And it's a shorter, more intense high. So here, you know, it lasts, I think, I don't remember the effects. If I mentioned the effects of fentanyl, I can look for that for you. I don't have it here, Mary, but I can ask, I can get that information for you, or if some folks here in the room know how many hours eventually fentanyl lasts in the system, please let us know. I think it lasts, I know it lasts less than heroin, but not so sure how much, but I can find that for you. And so, you know, when we think about, you know, substance use, right, important to think about, you know, folks started is thinking about the wave of prescription pills and how folks have then had to move to use heroin because they haven't been able to access the medication that they were prescribed and needed, right? And so what this has caused is that folks have had to move to the unregulated market to be able to access pain medication because they're not able to get it prescribed in the way that they were before, because of the backlash around, you know, pharmaceutical companies and what they've done. And so that's led folks to use street-based opioids, right? And that, you know, it's important for us to know because there's considerations that we need to take around that, particularly around opioid overdoses or supporting people to navigate use more safely. And so, Greg, I think it'd be really cool if you could help me put folks into breakout groups now. But before we do that, I want to share this information in the chat box, which is an activity. I want you, when you get into your groups, if you can, I would love for you to have a conversation with each other about how do you or your program provide resources surrounding opioid use? What are the things that you do to support or provide resources for folks that are interested in knowing more, that have named that they use opioids? What could be some harm reduction or risk reduction practices for folks that use opioids that you have shared with your participants? And what would be some of the supplies that you think would be helpful to offer to folks that use opioids, right? Supplies that you would be willing to offer in your program or that you already do. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing for a second so that I can copy and paste this in the chat box, if that's okay. Well, everyone, we're going to resume the second half of this training, which has to do with risk reduction strategies, particularly for strategies we want to share with folks that are using opioids. And so, as we mentioned before, when we think of opioid overdose, it's important to be mindful of the signs, which makes like a brief refresher. Folks are unconscious and non-responsive. That means that the person, if you know their name or you're calling in their name and because you know it, or you're saying, hey, buddy, and you're moving them and touching them, you're shaking them, right? And they're not responding. That's one thing, one sign. Look at the fingertips, the nail beds, and the mouth, right? If it's purple, ashy, gray, or silver, That's another sign that there's lack of oxygen. And then finally, their body may slump, typically forward. Those are all signs of an opioid overdose. And we know that naloxone will reverse an overdose. We want to connect participants to harm reduction or syringe access programs because they have availability of naloxone. If you are in the Bay Area or in San Francisco, you can get this free for service providers. You can go to the pharmacy there from the health department. And if you're interested in more information about our community-based naloxone distribution program, which is the DOPE project, you're welcome to reach out to Frances Fu, who's the person who runs the program for us and can connect you to other providers in the East Bay. And if you are interested in learning about providers outside of the East Bay in other parts of California, you can reach out to me and I can connect you to Savannah O'Neill and our colleagues and Jenna Haywood, who are our colleagues that are leading the California statewide work, and they are working with harm reduction programs there and can connect you to those folks on the ground. So I will leave my email in the chat box before we end so that you can have it and you can always reach out to me. Someone mentioned that medication for opioid use disorder is a really good tool to support folks in transitioning their substance use. And it is important to know that there's different kinds of medication for opioid use disorder. Some folks will prefer one type of medication over other based on their needs and their experience. The important thing is, and what we believe is, that this should be widely available for folks and that we have to make sure that we hear what folks feel works best for them when able to offer these for folks. Some folks will prefer buprenorphine, other folks will prefer methadone. Some folks that are been using methadone for a long time, they feel really comfortable with it. There's different regulations and constraints around some of these. And so we want to make sure that we're connecting folks to the service that best meets their needs. Important conversation to have with folks in general, right? But particularly when we're thinking of supporting folks to make the best choices for themselves. And so I want to remind us about the routes of administration, because we're going to be discussing what are some potential risks and things that we can do to avoid those risks when we're using substances. So if we're snorting the drugs, that means that we're using up our nose. If we're smoking them, it goes from our mouth to our lungs. If we're swallowing the drugs, it means that it goes from my mouth to my stomach. So, it has to travel, right? And then get dissolved there and absorbed by the membranes. And dissolved by the acids. If we're booty bumping or plugging, which it means that we're using it rectally or inserting it rectally, and injecting, it means that we're using a needle to inject that to our body. So that's intravenous injection. And so in terms of snorting, some of the risks that we have heard folks have experienced is that people may have shared with us experiencing nasal damage because it destroys the mucous membrane, particularly around the septum, which is the tissue that connects both of our nostrils. So long-term use can put a hole through our septum, and it may damage the sense of smell. Folks have lost the ability to smell, and if they have used their drugs by snorting them for a long time. So if we talk to someone and they tell us that their preferred method of using substances is snorting, some of the things that we could share with them or explore if they already know are the following. We want to encourage folks to prepare their nose, right? We want to rinse our nose out before and after we snort. And we can also offer them the possibility of alternating nostrils for drug use. We want to also work with folks around how they prepare their drugs. It's really important for folks to crush the powder as fine as possible, to cut the straw in half to avoid sharing the same device, right? And some programs offer safer snorting kits that will have 2 of each, right? So that way, if I'm using with someone else, I have my straw and they're different colors, right? So I know the blue one is mine and then the red one is Linda's, and that way we don't get mixed up, right? We can use the same substance. We're sharing the drug, but we're not sharing the tools with which we're using the drug. And so cutting the straw or having straws that are different colors in half. And sometimes we share also in those paper, right? For they can put down and they can put the drug and cut it on top of the paper, because that avoids the drug touching surfaces that we don't know what they have. We know hepatitis C virus can last around the outside of the body for 21 days, is it? If I'm not mistaken. And so, and it takes a little bit of that virus that is very strong and mighty, right? If I buy something, I cut it in, put it in my drug, snorted it, I have a cut in my nose, it goes into my bloodstream. You know what I mean? It could happen. And so we want to avoid, right, for folks to have that. And so, and also you can see the drugs better. So sometimes what we do is we give like a construction paper of like a light color. So not a light color, like a color like red or blue, whatever color, so they can have it there posted in the kit. And then in terms of aftercare, so it's like, you know, things that we want to do is, again, rinse inside of our nose with water 10 minutes after we snort. Do not use antiseptic sprays unless your doctor has asked you to do so. And if you have a sinus infection or you have sores inside your nose, like open wounds inside your nose that won't go away, it may make sense that you may need to go get medical treatment for that. Particularly, it's also dangerous, right? And it can impact your nose health. So it's really, really important for folks, if they're sharing that, to recommend to them, hey, you know, it may be, have you checked that out with a medical provider? Would you like me to support you in doing that? Now we're going to talk about booty bumping, which is one of my favorite things to talk about. And so booty bumping means that folks have the ability to use their drugs rectally. Oh, yes, Adriana, I can definitely connect you to those. There's Adriana is asking in the chat box if there is a list of providers who are certified in buprenorphine prescription. Yes, absolutely. And also California has a program called the ED Bridge, which is providing an emergency healthcare settings. There's harm reduction navigators that can support folks that come in that may be using substances and or particularly opioids, and connect them to harm reduction programs, but also to low threshold buprenorphine, access to buprenorphine as well. So I'll share those resources with you. And I think they're throughout the whole state. Absolutely, thank you for asking. In terms of booty bumping and safer booty bumping, what we want to recommend folks, if they're interested in using this technique, is to use a turkey baster or to remove the needle from the syringe, right? So we don't want the pointy sort of like metal tip there. We want to remove that and just have the barrel and use a turkey baster, whichever one works best or you have accessible. We want to make sure that we are clearing the internal and external anal sphincters, right? So we want to make sure that we use some kind of, oh my God, I forgot how you say that in English. Dios mío, lavado. I forgot.
Lubricant?
No, not lubricant. When you wash, oh my God,
Like
an enema. Yes, you want to make sure, do you just clean it all? You use clean water to dissolve your drugs, but you also need lubricant. Yes. We don't want to share the booty bumping syringes. So again, or my baster, like I use one and the other person can use the other one. You can insert pills or powder drugs as well and use an enema beforehand. And it was here. And I was thinking about it in Spanish in my head, and it's here in English. But you also want to use lubricant and make sure that whatever you're using is well lubricated, so you don't tear or create abrasions. So you will fill a 1 milligram syringe with that drug solution that you're using. You will add some lube to the end of the syringe. And as you're standing up, you're going to insert it slowly halfway the length of the syringe, right? So if the syringe was, I'm using a pen here because I don't have anything better at the moment, but like if this was the syringe, I would just like go halfway right there. And then you're going to press the plunger slowly, and then you remove the syringe. And it is important to be relaxed so that there is no leakage. So you gotta make sure that you're doing this the most relaxed and way possible. And this is a really sort of safer way for folks that want to use, that may not necessarily want to inject, or that they don't feel comfortable smoking or snorting. It is also a way where you don't have, you don't want to have marks in your body. It's helpful for some folks. It's connected to also sexual pleasure and enjoyment, right? So there's a host of reasons why folks would want a booty bump, and it can be a good alternative for folks if they also don't have access to certain resources that they normally would use to use their substances. Another really great harm reduction supply or tool that folks can use to engage in risk reduction is having access to fentanyl test strips. And I'm sure I want to see folks, have you in your communities, are you familiar with these? You can text in the chat box if you know about fentanyl test strips, and if you know your participants are using them, it'd be great to know. You can say, yes, people know about them, we have them available, or no. These are not specifically made to test drugs. They're made to test urine to see if there's presence of fentanyl in the urine. But people that use drugs are really, really smart and really want to take care of each other and their health. And so they realize that you could repurpose these to detect fentanyl in the drug supply, because not every program has a drug spectrometer where they can test your drugs, right? And so they started using them to figure out if there was presence, if they were reactive to fentanyl. And that way they knew, well, I need to be mindful of that and I need to use differently, right? To make sure that I'm safe. And so you can purchase these from DanSafe or individually, or from BTNX in bulk, which is the company that produces them. They cost about $1 a strip when you purchase them in bulk. And harm reduction programs may have them, and you can connect with them if you feel that your participants may want to use them, or you want to share them with your participants. And so, and once folks, yeah, and I can connect you to, we have materials. I'm not sure if I'm gonna have the link here, but we have some materials that we develop for participants and with participants that use them. They helped us develop these materials to share with other folks as to how to use them. And it explains it really clearly, and they're really simple, and that you can fold them. It's like a little square that you fold, so you can bring it with you and you can print it. I can share those with you as well. So you can have those resources. So 1 line means that it's positive for fentanyl, and 2 lines, it means that it's negative for fentanyl. These are not, because they were not made to test drugs, they're not necessarily 100% accurate. For me, these are a really good tool to engage people in conversation around their substance use and the practices that they are putting into play to make sure that they're keeping each other safe and themselves safe, right? And so I see it as a really good conversation starter tool. And also it shows me that people that use drugs really, truly care about themselves, their health and their well-being, and the well-being of others around them and their community. And so here is how you can use them. So you add sterile water to your empty baggie or the cooker that you just used. You mix well. You want to make sure that you do that after you load your shot, right? After you make sure that you have your drugs ready to use. And then you dip that test strip in the water up to the first line, and then you hold it there for about 15 seconds. And then you will place the test strip on a sterile surface, or you can do it across the cooker. And then again, 1 line is positive, 2 lines is negative. And that will be the way to do a reading in terms of knowing if your test strips are positive for fentanyl. You're testing here, you can test heroin and you can test cocaine too, to figure out if your drugs have fentanyl in them. And we, one thing that we can do also when we talk about next week during the Stimulants 101 is we'll look how to use these for methamphetamines. So in terms of harm reduction services, as I mentioned, you all are doing really important work that intersects with harm reduction. And sometimes I think as providers, we have this notion sort of drilled upon us that we have to do it all. And the reality is that we don't, that, we tend to be most effective when we work in collaboration and in partnership with others that provide these services as well. And so harm reduction services, if they're available in your community and you have not connected yet to your local harm reduction program, I encourage you to do so. They are really excited to work with other partners in supporting the lives and well-being of people that use drugs. Yes, Pike, I appreciate your comment. Yes, it is important to note that this is different for stimulants, that it's different for opiates. Yeah, and we have one specifically for folks using methamphetamine. And so we will share that we'll share that information next week, as well as I'll share the link to our resources in our webpage if folks want to find more information about how to use these in different contexts. Yes. So in terms of harm reduction services, our programs offer syringe access and disposal. And a lot of the times we have folks in the community that may need to dispose of syringes safely, not because necessarily they're using those syringes for substance use, but they use them for medications and they don't have where to dispose them. So they can come to their harm reduction program, and they do, and they are able to dispose of them there. So that's a really important community service that harm reduction programs provide. We also provide safer drug use supplies. And as I said, not only syringes and tourniquets and cookers, cottons, all those things that we use are associated with injection substance use, but also safer snorting and smoking supplies for folks. Programs also offer overdose prevention education and materials, such as access to naloxone, as well as training people on how to use naloxone and how to respond to an overdose in their community, or if they have a family member, a loved one, or a friend that may be using substances and may be potentially exposed to experiencing an overdose. We offer a ton of safer sex materials. So I think Melissa was sharing that she does a lot of reproductive and sexual health work. And so we love to be able to provide those materials, but also connect folks to those services. Sometimes some harm reduction programs may have folks come and do screening and testing for different sexually transmitted infections or diseases inside of the program. I worked with a program where we had folks do that, but also provide folks that were interested in having access to contraceptives, to have access to those, whether it was prescription for certain medications and or to have IUDs or others being able to be inserted there. So we definitely offer a lot of that through our harm reduction program. Referrals to medication for opioid use disorder. Some programs offer low threshold buprenorphine access to in their programs. They have a person who is able to prescribe, go in certain times a week, and are able to offer participants that are interested access to buprenorphine. We've also had folks that have a nurse or someone that is trained in wound care to be able to come in and do that for participants. And that's something that can be really helpful, particularly for participants that are hesitant of accessing that kind of care in traditional medical settings because they've had really horrible experiences or negative experiences that have been really harmful to them when they have gone to those spaces to have support with an abscess or with other kinds of infections that are in the skin. We also see harm reduction services offer drop-in spaces for folks to come in, to relax, to be warm, to eat some food, drink some water, have some coffee, use the computer, use the phone, just relax, just rest, just be, to get connected to other services. We provide referrals, as I mentioned. We work within housing first settings. There's a big intersection between housing first and harm reduction. So we have seen programs that have taken both modalities and built it into one. And finally, we offer or we believe in safer consumption spaces. And we certainly have seen harm reduction programs outside of the United States, Canada, Australia, and Europe successfully offer safer consumption services for more than 30 years. There's been 0 deaths due to overdose in those safer consumption spaces. Those safer consumption spaces are usually led and are staffed by people that use drugs, that have experience with substance use, that have either present or past lived experience. We don't have yet a legal safe consumption space in this country, but we hope that at some point we do. Because they are also a space where folks can come in and then get connected to other services if and when they choose to do so. And before we finish, we have a couple of more minutes, but I wanted folks to, someone here, I wanted to ask you if there are any other harm reduction services that you can think of that you are not seeing here in this slide that you would like to add. Hello. I think if know if the person wants to share, but if you want to share, you can use your microphone or you can chat it in the chat box. If there are any other harm reduction services that may not be listed in this slide that you think would be part of what programs offer or could offer.
Hey, this is Alessandra. I want to mention one that I see programs offer a lot, which is just direct conversation about drugs with the kind of information that you're giving right now, which is really rare. And being able to ask people questions like, what do you like about your drug use right now? Or what are you hating about your drug? Like that kind of in-depth conversation that's non-judgmental is just, it's beautiful to see.
Thank you, Alessandra. I think that piece of relationship building, right, that really connects with people's humanity and centers the expertise of people that use drugs in terms of, you know, what they are experiencing, what they know, and what they want is so important, right? Because when we're thinking then of referrals or thinking of offering other services, right, we have already heard from folks what it is that they need and want, right? And building that relationship, that trust and empathy is so crucial, right? When we're working to support people that normally don't experience that outside of those settings. So I really appreciate you sharing that. And Melissa's sharing that wound care is a great incentive as well as a way to rebuild trust with medical providers. Yes, Melissa, do you have any thoughts around that you would like to share with the group? I don't know, I would love to hear if you do.
It's something that we're looking at as we look to engage with certain populations, especially people experiencing homelessness, and our providers who've been working with people experiencing homelessness. That's always one of the top things that they do. And our harm reduction specialists, even though they're not medical providers, that's a bulk of what they end up doing besides the needle exchange and the other safe sex practices. They have a huge bag and they have a bunch of different wound care materials, and they're often administering those to the participants and their clients on the street.
Thank you. And I was just thinking that we haven't mentioned this, but vaccinations are also a service that harm reduction programs offer or partner with organizations to provide. I remember, I think you're in Los Angeles, you mentioned, right, Melissa?
Yes, and we brought it up. The Vaccine Plus clinics are another way that they're using wound care, and then we're going to be hopefully getting them rapid HIV and rapid syphilis tests, so they can incorporate those into the Vaccine Plus clinics.
Absolutely.
So using COVID as a way to help us rather than hurt us.
Yeah. And I think that participants, when you build those relationships, they trust us, right? So if I have worked with folks that have shared working with participants that came to them with some vaccine hesitancy, but because they trusted, as Alessandra was saying, those harm reduction programs, because they're able to come in and really be seen and are able to come in as their full selves into that space, they were able to ask questions and get clarification, right? Or at least voice those things in a way that felt that they had space where it could be held, right? And to receive the information and welcome the information in a different way so that they could make choices that work best for them. So I really appreciate that. And Acacia is sharing, AC Cassia is sharing in Sacramento, they have a free injection clinic staffed by the UC Davis residents and medical students on Saturdays. That is awesome. That is great. And it's low threshold, right? So you're providing a space for people to come in, right? And a place that they trust, where they know the folks, and that makes a huge difference. And even if we, harm reduction programs are able sometimes to not necessarily provide themselves the vaccination, but connect with people that may need access to participants that they see, right? Which is something that I've seen when they had the I think it was the Hep A or Hep B outbreak a couple of years ago. And harm reduction programs were key in helping folks navigate that. And getting people access to the information and resources that they needed to make sure that that outbreak was stopped. So I think those are really good points, and some really good examples of other services that are also within the spectrum of harm reduction. Anything else, any other service that you think would be considered a harm reduction service that is not here in the slides that you would like to offer? Oh, I love that. There's a vet who provides vaccine clinic for persons who are on house. Yes, absolutely. Thank you, AC. Cassia, I appreciate that. Creating that space as well for persons who are unhoused. I think something that I've seen a lot is a harm reduction service that we see with our participants is having clinics for their pets who are part of their family, right? And so having access to veterinarians that can give them vaccinations or shots or check their pets, as well as food for their pets, is also really important. Those are members of our family, right? And sometimes it's really difficult to have access to veterinary care that is not incredibly expensive. And so I've seen a lot of programs provide that service for program participants. And it's really made a difference in terms of also integrating it as a harm reduction service as well. And a way to really listen and see the community that we're working with. So before we close, I would love for you all, when you're going back, and there's room for folks if you have questions or comments, but thinking about, when you're going back to your spaces, to the places that you are working at, and have conversation with your other peers who may not necessarily be here today, think about what are 3 tools or services that you or your organization already provides that you think or consider harm reduction. What would be a barrier to implementing harm reduction? When I think the principles of harm reduction, I want to refer back to thinking about people as human beings, treating them with respect, with empathy, with care, really challenging stigma and criminalization, right? So what would be one barrier to implementing those principles, foundational principles of harm reduction into your work? And what would be one opportunity that you have to implement harm reduction into your work? So I think this is something that I would encourage you all to think about and to really engage others in conversation. Because I think that through exercises like this, through having these spaces to think and reflect, it can also show us that we are already doing a lot of things and that there's things that we could do in partnership with others that can bring about, structural changes that are so important and vital for the health and well-being of everybody, including people that use drugs and their communities and their families. So if folks feel inclined to share in the chat box, what would be one opportunity that you have to implement harm reduction into your work? I would love to hear, or if you want to share verbally, but also if you want to use the chat box, that'd be great so other folks can see it too. Folks what is one opportunity you have to implement the principles or just harm reduction to your work? Yes, working with folks in coalition and in community. Thank you, Marcela. So you already have methadone, Suboxone, and you refer, thank you, Katie. So connecting folks or continuing to connect folks to access to medications for opioid use disorder. Thank you for sharing. Well, you'll think about that. I am going to look for the link for our California initiatives page. So you can have that because there you'll find a list of all the actually beautiful map with all of the harm reduction programs across the state of California. So let me just stop sharing so I can look for that, but folks can continue to type in the chat box if you feel so inclined. Yes, I'm checking for those as well. The BUP providers, 1 second. So this is our California page. I'm gonna put it here. And here you will find all of the programs that are offering harm reduction services across the state, as well as other relevant information about both ED Bridge and opioid safety networks, etc. Information of our partnership with the California Department of Health. Oh, thank you, Jenna. Central Valley Harm Reduction Groups has quarterly meetings. That's awesome. It's exciting to know. Let me see if I can find this. Okay, and I think I found that information of the buprenorphine prescribers. I'm just trying to open it in my slow browser, so I apologize if this takes a second. I don't know if other folks have other questions or comments or anything that you would like to add. Right here. So this is the prescriber for buprenorphine, prescribers of buprenorphine and naloxone here in California. So you can get it through ProPublica. There's a list of, you can find them here. So I hope this is helpful. Well, folks, that's all I had for you today. I hope that this was helpful. Thank you for your time and for being here. And thank you, Linda and Greg, for the invitation to be in community with you all.
So great to have you. Thank you so much. Just a reminder, we will be sending out slides. A few people were asking about, we've recorded this session, so there were people who I know didn't make it. And I believe we have a lot of resources that will also be included. So thank you all for that. Thank you, Tamara.
Of course. And I saw that there's a question around further training, and I just want to share a link to our online training, which we have available for folks in the state of California free of cost. Our online training modules, which are foundations of harm reduction, how to work best with people that use drugs and overdose. So those are free to you all. And you're able to just go to our page and register, and you'll be able to get access to those. So if you're interested in more harm reduction, absolutely check those out. They're 90 minutes, they're self-paced, and they're great. I think that I think you'll find them useful. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you. And as a reminder, I know this has been mentioned, but important for the people on this meeting is next week, we'll be doing the, I believe it's Tuesday the 16th at 9 a.m. Tanagra will be back and we'll be talking about stimulants.
Yes.
So
we'll be
back.
Yes, absolutely. I'd love to see you back. And I just you can access the slides via that Google Docs, Google Slides link that I just shared with you all. So you should be able to have the same materials that I used today there. And my email is this. Reduction.org. Yes, harm reduction. I made a mistake in the spelling, but you can find me in the webpage too. Type too fast. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Nagra. That's great. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.